Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Leftovers, Season 3, Episode 1, Book of Kevin. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of The Leftovers, so I'll have to start by giving a spoiler warning for The Leftovers up to Season 3, Episode 1. If you haven't seen up to the season premiere of Season 3, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So I know I say a lot of praise about a lot of shows that I like, such as The Expanse, Black Sails, and Better Call Saul, and don't get me wrong, all these shows are amazing and you should be watching them if you're not. But The Leftovers, I realize, has a quality that particularly has me in awe, as this is a show beyond special and unique experience that will go down in television history. So I would say that this is the second best show currently airing on television behind Game of Thrones. And when I say currently airing, I'm including shows that are on hiatus at the moment. I mean all the shows that haven't completed their run yet. And that includes like Netflix shows and other HBO shows. I just love the show that much. In fact, I'd even say this show is on par with Game of Thrones in a way that I'm completely excited for and profoundly affected by watching each and every episode. It affects me in a way other shows don't. Even great shows like The Expanse. In my opinion, The Leftovers is something truly special. And what I loved about this episode in particular is that the more I think about it, the more I like it. And the more I have to ponder over. I mean, this episode has many layers and little aspects to ponder over and speculate about. And that is the mark of a truly great show, in my opinion. So enough gushing, let's get into the specifics about this episode, starting with the opening scene, which I wasn't too sure if they do like a weird, seemingly unrelatable scene at the beginning of the season like they did with Season 2. But because they already did this with Season 2, it wasn't as surprising this time around. Like with Season 2, when I was watching the opening scene, I was wondering if I was watching the right show. But this time I knew it was the right show, but it was still a bit unexpected. Like I had no idea where they would go and what relevance it would have. And like the Season 2 opener, I'm sure the significance of this scene will be more metaphorical than literal. So I want to call these guys like pilgrims or Quakers, but I'm not sure who the hell they are or even where they are. I had to watch the opening scene several times to get what was going on here, as it was a bit vague. And from what I gathered, it appeared to me that they're a group of these religious people, you may even call them a cult, that believe that the rapture is coming. And the head guy, the priest, reverend, or whatever, keeps telling everyone that the rapture will happen on this date. So they all go out on the roofs on that date and it doesn't happen. And at first their group is quite large and a lot of people are on board with it, but the more the guy gets the rapture date wrong, the more people leave and eventually their group is quite small. And all along the way, the other village people shun them and mock them. And so we follow one woman in particular, and eventually her husband and son also fall off of their beliefs and no longer believe this priest guy. But she does and remains devout. But they shun her and leave her because of that. And she waits on the roof all night through the rainstorm, and everyone, including her husband, thinks she's nuts. So she goes and lays down next to these other devout followers who may or may not be dead. I was a bit unclear on that point and why they were lying down. But anyway, as I said, I think this will have metaphorical meaning rather than literal meaning for the rest of the season, just like the Season 2 opener. And the most obvious meaning seems to be about faith and how someone can be so devoted to their faith against all odds. Now, the show has always had a very strong science versus faith element to it, particularly in the second season. I believe this will be an even bigger focus this year. Anyway, we transitioned perfectly from this religious lady lying next to all these people dressed in white to the guilty remnant all dressed in white lying next to each other at the visitor center in Jarden immediately following the events of season 2 finale when they ransacked the town. And when Evie asks Meg what's going to happen next, Meg tells this nice little story about Siegfried and Roy and their tigers and how eventually the tigers would bite their fucking faces off. And then Evie goes outside to see a bunch of law enforcement agents running away, and then a missile is launched from above and kills everyone. Wow, just wow, that was just shocking. I love this scene for several reasons. First of all, this fills in a plot hole that I complained about with the season 2 finale, and that is that the show has clearly established the ATF as these murderous thugs that do whatever it takes to stop these cults, and they have absolutely no regard for their lives and will just go in and kill them all. So it seemed odd to me that they would simply just allow Meg and her guilty remnant group to take over Jarden and cause all this chaos. So apparently they didn't. It just took them a day to respond, but their response was very strong indeed. Now, to be clear, I always had a problem with the way the show has portrayed the ATF as being a bunch of murderous thugs that will just go in and kill anyone involved in the cult. Regardless, this seems to feed into this myth perpetuated by films like Kevin Smith's Red State that, portrays the ATF as just going in and killing everyone involved with the cult, when in real life, I think the actual situations are a lot more complicated and complex than that, and they're not just going to kill everyone. So it just seems like a bunch of hooey to me. That being said, in real life, 2% of the world's population didn't disappear, and someone can't just drink poison and go to an afterlife involving in a hotel and then come back to life. So in other words, the show requires a certain suspension of disbelief, so I'll take the ATF's unrealistic behavior under that umbrella. After all, in this universe, the show, the departure happened, which started a cascade of all sorts of cults that rise everywhere. So in this world, it might make more sense that the ATF get a bit overzealous when combating them. But overall, the kind of behavior they display here, is ridiculous as it is consistent with how the ATF has been established to behave on the show. This is the same ATF that raided Wayne's Ranch and just went around killing everyone at random, and the same ATF that urged Kevin to allow them to take care of the guilty remnant problem in Mapleton. And after Kevin admitted to being involved in Patty's death and burying her body to hide it, nobody gave a shit about it because she was a member of the guilty remnant. So as unrealistic as I think it may be, it does fit into the universe of the show that they would respond to Meg's rogue faction of the remnant by just bombing them with a drone, as we did see them put a little camera thingy viewing into the visitor center to make sure that it was just the guilty remnant in there before bombing them. One thing that I found really interesting was how Meg knew about what was going to happen, but she didn't tell anyone else. It was obvious from her little Siegfried and Roy story that she knew exactly what would happen and didn't particularly care. But if you think about it, this makes her quite the diabolical villain, as she knew by doing this stunt, she was sentencing all of her followers to death, and she didn't bother to tell them about this. Evie in particular clearly did not want to die, but Meg didn't care about any of them and just led them all to their deaths. Furthermore, it does make you wonder that after the 3-year time jump, if the guilty remnant are even still around. Because those young adults protesting at the baptism that insisted that the guilty remnant were killed by the ATF were obviously not a part of the guilty remnant, and we saw no sign of their existence in this episode. So that could possibly mean nothing. However, just my own wild speculation here, but perhaps the ATF went hard out after the entire Guilty Remnant movement after this incident. After all, the Guilty Remnant leadership wasn't on board with Meg's radical actions exactly for the reason that they didn't want to draw too much attention to themselves. And after Meg took over the whole town, that may have been exactly what she did. So I'm going to make a prediction here that we won't see any Guilty Remnant at all going forward, and I believe that the ATF would have viciously went after the entire movement and killed a lot of people, to the point that people would be too afraid to be involved with that movement anymore, so effectively ended it. But that's my wild speculation. But what's interesting is that Meg didn't give a fuck about any of these consequences and what that the others had to face, because she knew she was going to die anyway. Again, it's kind of despicable of her. And I do believe this is the last we'll see of Meg and Evie, unless of course they appear in the afterlife when Kevin visits there again, which I do think is entirely possible. But I think it's pretty clear that they both died, as we saw that missile being launched in the reflection of Evie's glasses. I know that John thinks that she's still alive, but I think he's just in denial. And because of the fact that she faked her own departure before, he's able to convince himself that she may be faking her death. But I do think that it is definitely the case that they are both dead. Dead is dead. Before I was wondering how Evie and Meg would factor into the season, but it turns out that they won't. That is, unless we see them in the afterlife, or at least that's just my thinking on the matter. It was interesting hearing that the ATF concocted a story that a gas line blew up that killed them all. I suppose that's how they're able to get away with doing something that's so blatantly illegal, to put it mildly. And it's interesting that Tommy didn't believe it and knew it was bullshit. Kevin insisted that it wasn't, but I kind of believe that he knows that it's bullshit too. And his position wasn't so much as, oh, it didn't happen that way, but more of, we don't talk about it, we stick to the official story. It's also pretty interesting how those protesters had shirts with Evie's face on it, as she turned into some kind of martyr, which I find pretty ironic, because I don't think that'd be at all what she would want, but that makes this all more interesting. However, another interesting aspect to it is that even though they were all killed, it seemed like they were ultimately effective in opening Jarden up to the public, as we see after we jump 3 years into the future that Jarden is no longer a national park that requires wristbands to get in and is open to all. So instead of there being like a bunch of people camped just outside of Jarden, they're camped in the town center. And you do see a big difference in Jarden, how there's tents like camped out in front of a lot of front yards and stuff. And it's no longer like the tourist attraction that it used to be with these little carts and like tour guides, and you don't see the woman in the dress anymore. And it does make sense that the events at the end of season 2 would have this kind of effect on the town. So yeah, in a way, even though they were all killed, they managed to permanently change Jarden. It's not really worth dying for, in my opinion, but that's just me. So, as I said, we jump 3 years later and we see all the characters we know have changed. As we saw from the promos, Kevin is once again the chief of police, this time of Jarden, but that makes sense. That's what he'd go back to, as in the season 2 finale when he died and went into the afterlife and had to choose which clothes to put on. He puts on the police uniform, as that signified that's who he really is. In fact, the shot of him putting on the uniform from the closet in this episode was very reminiscent of when he put that uniform on in the afterlife. So it's just showing that he is once again being his true self. In fact, everyone seems to be getting a happy ending. Tommy, who was so distraught before, seems content in his role as a police officer and has a really good relationship with his father. In fact, this kind of mirrors the relationship Kevin used to have with his father when his father was chief of police. And what's more interesting is we see someone doing the handprint reading, and I assume it's Isaac, that he's back in town, but then at the reveal, it is in fact John John Murphy who's doing the reading. And I was just like, what? And then it's further revealed that Laurie is in a room upstairs feeding John information about the clients so that John can masquerade as a psychic. And then we learn that John and Laurie are now lovers. And I believe later it is revealed they are in fact married. So that's quite a giant leap in John's character, as he went from being a guy who would just burn down people's houses for claiming to be a psychic to someone who's actively masquerading as a psychic. But then we see them shred the money that they get for the readings, making it clear that they are doing it to help people, not to scam them, and that they only take their money so the clients will believe them. It seems kind of silly to me that they would shred the money. I mean, why not just give it to charity? And how is it that these two make a living? But as far as John and Laurie being together, it seems a tad convenient of a way to keep Laurie in the story, but okay, that's fine. I'll just roll with it. It makes total sense that John isn't with Erica anymore, as their relationship seemed to be at a very bad place, so there was no way it would survive the news of Evie's death. Although we saw Erica in the promos for Season 3, so we know that we will see her again, but we didn't get to see her in this episode, so we still don't know what she's up to. We also get a visit from Jill in this episode that reveals that she's moved on to college. So we only see her very briefly, and it gives me the impression that she won't feature very much in this season at all. Going to college is the excuse that the shows tend to give whenever they write off characters around that age. I'm a bit disappointed because she was one of my favorite characters, but I'm not too surprised because it seems her storyline has pretty much run its course in Season 1, because she was struggling in Season 1, she was struggling to be okay, and at the start of Season 2 she seemed to accomplish that. So ever since then, the writers didn't really seem to know what to do with her. I'm really glad that they didn't have her with Michael anymore, because that really didn't make any sense. And it seems that she has somewhat repaired her relationship with her mother, although she explained that she didn't want to stay with her because she would just be apologizing the whole time. So there still seems to be some sort of tension or regret there, but for the most part they seem okay. So everyone seems okay and happy. Kevin and Nora are still together and they're in love. Matt is prospering as the preacher and now has a huge flock of followers. His wife is still healthy and gave birth to a healthy boy. So that begs the question, what conflict is the show going to focus on? Why not just end the show here? Because happy endings for everyone. Well, of course, not all is totally okay. For one, Kevin and Nora's adopted baby Lily was noticeably absent. They mentioned that she's gone and that this absence may still be affecting Nora. Kevin seems a bit nervous about broaching the subject with her. So we still don't know what happened to Lily, but I have no doubt we will find out in due time, so I don't really care to speculate at this time. We just know that she's no longer in the picture, and I can't really comment on how effective or realistic this is until we know why. And tensions raised a bit when Kevin gets a visit from the dog shooting guy, Dean, from Season 1. When they had the scene where one of his deputies tells Kevin there's someone he knew from New York waiting for him in his office, my mind immediately went to the dog shooting guy. Even before he mentioned the thing about them being old hunting buddies, I didn't think of like the mayor of Mapleton or Kevin's old deputy or anyone else. I immediately just thought of the dog guy. And sure enough, it was him. There's always been a certain amount of intrigue and mystery surrounding this character, and he always behaved a bit strangely, so I was a bit curious to see him again. And it seems that Kevin, like me, expected him to bring up some intriguing piece of information that would deepen the mystery, but instead he just rambles some insane nonsense about dogs disguising themselves as people and infiltrating the government. I really liked the way they played this scene. It was very reminiscent of the scene in season 2 where someone called Nora about the lens theory but then started talking about the demon Azrael. In both cases, there was suspenseful music playing as it seemed to be building to some great revelation, but as soon as they started talking crazy, the music abruptly stopped. Kind of like, putting you in the mindset of the person who's listening because they were believing that something, intriguing or mystifying was coming, but as soon as they found out it's nonsense, they just snapped out of it. But I love the way the show often blurs the line between what is crazy and what is actual mysticism. For example, we do know that there are some fantastical elements in the universe of the show because it's pretty clear that Kevin did die and come back to life, so we can take it at face value that Kevin's time at the hotel did happen and that Patty wasn't just a delusion and that she was really attached to Kevin after her death, and he did have to go to the afterlife to get rid of her. But on the other hand, some other fantastical moments are left a bit more ambiguous as to whether or not they are real, such as Isaac's hand readings. Like we know that John and Laurie are faking it, but Isaac seemed to be genuine. And for that matter, Wayne's magic hugs. I've heard theories on both sides of the spectrum on whether or not he actually did have the ability to take people's pains away, or was he just depending on a placebo effect. However, there are other instances, such as the aforementioned demon Azrael theory, I think we can file that are very clearly, just fake and not at all like true and just crazy talk. And I think we can file this dog conspiracy under that same category. But I loved how they introduced specks of doubt, such as when Kevin was telling Dean that's all in his head and things like this don't exist. We see flashes of Kevin throwing young Patty in the well from his time in the afterlife. So I took these flashes as to indicate like Kevin's doubts. Even as he was speaking the words, it's all in your head, he thinks of his own experiences that others would say didn't happen and would say was all in his head, but it actually did happen. I'm not saying this gives credence to Dean's dog conspiracy theory, but it is interesting the effect this has on Kevin and his own internal struggle between what is fantastical and what is just fantasy. So later, Dean goes as far as to shoot at Kevin and Tommy, and this scene was really intense. It does seem that Dean has indeed gone off the deep end, which frankly doesn't seem like a very long journey from where we saw him in season 1, because there was always something really off about him. And this also makes sense in terms of what Laurie said to Kevin, that you don't just up and up tell someone that they're delusional. And I would have added the caveat of especially if they have a gun, because it's likely they would have this sort of reaction. I mean, you could see the hurt on Dean's face when Kevin said it was all in his head, so it totally fits to me that he'd go off the rails and start shooting at them. But Tommy came just in time to shoot him in the head, saving Kevin's life, but the effect of killing someone like that will likely still have lasting effects on Tommy, even though I know it's not the first time that he killed someone that way. I did like the added touch of a dog coming and gnawing at Dean's body, which did startle Kevin at first, but they revealed that the dog was just going for his sandwich. But still, it was a nice touch that adds to, who knows what's real and what's not feel that the show is pulling off. Again, I don't think the dog conspiracy is real, but it does make me wonder if Dean was onto something but was off, kind of misinterpreted it. Maybe not, I don't know. So the other thing that seemed kind of, off throughout this episode was the way that Matt and Michael kept acting all weird around Kevin and shooting each other looks whenever Kevin would say something. Michael, by the way, very predictably ended up being Matt's right-hand man at the church, and that part, at least it was telegraphed, but it does make sense for the story and for his character. But we noticed things like Michael slamming his laptop down when Kevin walks in the room, and Matt fixating on Kevin's word when he said divine intervention. And, when Michael baptizes Kevin, Matt seems like really in awe of it and making a big deal out of it. And all this is answered when Kevin comes home to find Nora with Mary, who announces that she's taking her son and leaving Matt. At first, Kevin tries to defend Matt until Mary reveals that Matt is writing a new gospel that's all about Kevin. And I love how Kevin immediately stops and no longer cares about Mary leaving Matt and instead is super pissed off about this book. So Kevin then goes to confront Matt about it and finds out Matt has gathered information about his journeys into the afterlife by, talking to people like Michael and John, who shared his experiences of both instances where Kevin died, visited the hotel, and came back to life. And so we get the central theme of the episode, which is Kevin's internal struggle with dealing with the supernatural events that he experienced and trying to reconcile what is real and what isn't. As it seems, he's very hesitant to reveal and talk openly about these events, as he knows it will be taken by most people as being insane and sort of the same way, and dismissed in the same way that he dismissed Dean's dog conspiracy theory. But we see through these brief flashes that these events are still very much on his mind. In fact, we get the scene where Kevin wraps a plastic bag around his head, and I heard a lot of speculation about this, but my interpretation is that this is Kevin trying to kill himself, but he can't. He simply doesn't die. And that's why he jumped in the water that they were told was poison, because he knew that he couldn't die. Or perhaps he wanted to see if he could die. So that makes it interesting when Matt tells Kevin that he can't die in Jarden, but Kevin denies it, because openly he tries to hide these things that most people would dismiss as insane. But in fact, he does know that Matt speaks the truth, at least to some degree, which is why I think Kevin hesitated when burning the book. But another thing to think about is in regards to Matt wanting to create a whole religion about Kevin, is that new religions are typically referred to and seen as cults. So in the show that features a variety of cults, what Matt is basically talking about is starting a cult where Kevin is the central messiah figure. And we saw from the start of the episode with the betrayal of the ATF how they treat cults. And so it makes them fair targets for them to just come in and kill everyone. So Kevin is actually very right to be afraid of what Matt's proposing to do. However, I will point out that it wasn't revealed whether or not Kevin actually burned the book. We see him go to burn the book, but the scene then transitions to the sky and the doves, which transitions into the final scene before we see what Kevin does with the book. I have a feeling that he doesn't burn it, but if he does, Matt was lying and does have another copy, because I just feel that we haven't seen the last of this book, and it will factor into the season later on. Another little tidbit I wanted to point out is the similarities to the opening scene of this episode with the situation with Matt, because like the woman in the opening scene, Matt's spouse is taking their child and leaving because of his faith, because he's too devout in believing something that most other people think is insane. So it does make me wonder if Matt's huge following will also eventually diminish, just like the preacher guy from the start of the episode. But speaking of the final scene, let me finally address this scene where we see someone wrangling pigeons, and what we can assume based on the trailers and what we know of this season is Australia. And we see a person with long gray hair, wrangling these pigeons. And to be honest, I originally thought that this was Kevin Garvey Sr. in Australia. But then we get the huge reveal that it is in fact Nora as a much older woman, where a nun with an Australian accent calls her Sarah and asks her if she knows someone named Kevin, to which she says no. So I absolutely love this scene. This is a truly epic way to end the episode. It reminds me a lot of these flash forward scenes in the final season of Breaking Bad, where each half season opens with a scene that actually takes place during the series finale, and thus we get a little peek on what's going to happen in the finale, but it's completely out of context, so we don't really know what's going to happen until we actually see the finale. So I do believe that will be the case here, that this is a glimpse of the ending where Nora ends up in Australia as a much older woman who goes under an alias and claims not to know Kevin. So this seems to suggest that she and Kevin are no longer together and don't get a happy ending after all. However, we don't know that for sure. Since she's going under an assumed name, maybe Kevin is too. Maybe they still live together. Who knows? The scene was intriguing, but still so vague as to leave a lot of things open. So I absolutely loved it and thought it was the perfect way to end this episode and keep me super intrigued to see what will happen next. So my rating for the Book of Kevin out of 10 is a 9. Excellent. An absolutely amazing way to begin the season that had me super intrigued to see the rest of the season. I would touch base with all our favorite characters to see that they are now, living happy lives. But it gives us enough intrigue, particularly with Matt's desire to create a religion around Kevin, combined with the danger presented with the ATF wiping out the guilty remnant and then covering it up. And also the very personal character story of Kevin himself coming to terms with his experiences in the afterlife and how he reconciles this with reality. So that's it for my review of the Book of Kevin. Be sure to check back here every week as I review every episode of The Leftovers. Also be sure to check out my channel as I do many more videos on other shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Better Call Saul, The Expanse, The 100, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.